The Atherton Art Museum, a venerable institution of hushed halls and shadowed alcoves, prided itself on its eclectic collection. But no acquisition had ever caused such a stir, such a ripple of disquiet beneath the veneer of scholarly appreciation as The Lady in Grey. It arrived unceremoniously in a plain wooden crate, unattributed, its provenance a complete mystery, dated only by expert analysis to the late 18th century. Elias Thorne, a junior curator with a poet's sensitivity and an academic's meticulousness, was assigned the initial cataloging. From the moment the canvas was unveiled, he felt a profound, almost gravitational pull. The painting depicted a woman of ethereal, almost unsettling beauty. Her gown, a cascade of dove-gray silk, seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Her face was framed by dark, severe hair, but it was her eyes that captivated and disturbed in equal measure. Large, silver gray, and filled with an ancient, bottomless sorrow. Her lips were curved in the faintest suggestion of a smile that held no warmth, only a weary, knowing sadness. "She's remarkable," Elias breathed, the word inadequate. The senior curator, Dr. Albright, a man whose cynicism was as legendary as his expertise, merely grunted. "Another melancholic noblewoman. Find out who she is, Thorne, and try not to fall in love with her." Falling in love wasn't the right phrase. Fascination, perhaps, or a creeping, insidious obsession. Elias spent his days in the archives, his nights poring over obscure texts, searching for any clue to the lady's identity or her artist. The museum decided to display her almost immediately, and she quickly became a focal point, visitors drawn to her enigmatic presence. It was during his late-night research sessions, alone in the vast, echoing silence of the Baroque wing where the Lady in Grey now hung, that Elias first noticed the anomalies. A subtle shift in the folds of her gown from one evening to the next, almost imperceptible but there. He'd meticulously photographed his findings, comparing them, convincing himself it was tricks of the light of his tired eyes. Then came the scent. Faint at first, a delicate, almost ghostly perfume of lilies. He'd searched the wing, thinking a new floral arrangement had been placed, but there was nothing. The scent would appear without warning, always near the painting, and then vanish just as quickly, leaving behind a lingering chill. The security guards started their own hushed conversations. Old Henderson, who'd patrolled these halls for 30 years, swore her silver eyes followed him on his rounds. Young Maria reported cold spots that would materialize directly in front of the canvas, so intense they'd raise goose flesh on her arms even in the climate-controlled gallery. One guard even claimed to have heard a faint, sighing whisper as he passed, a sound like silk rustling in an empty room. Elias's research yielded nothing. The lady remained a beautiful, sorrowful enigma. His dreams, however, became increasingly vivid, terrifyingly intimate. He'd find himself in a vast, decaying ballroom, chandeliers draped in cobwebs, dust motes dancing in phantom moonlight. And she would be there, his lady in gray, her hand cool in his as they waltzed to silent music. She would lean close, her breath smelling faintly of lilies, and whisper secrets into his ear, not of her identity, but of heartbreak, of betrayal centuries old, of a love so fierce it had curdled into something dark and possessive. He'd wake with a gasp, his heart pounding, the phantom scent of lilies clinging to his bedclothes, the echo of her silken whisper in his mind. His colleagues began to notice the change in him. His usual meticulousness became a feverish obsession. He grew pale, his eyes shadowed, his focus solely on the painting. He'd spend hours just staring at it, sometimes murmuring to himself or to her. He'd neglected other duties, his once promising career faltering. "Doctor," Albright warned him, "Thorne, get a grip. It's a piece of canvas and pigment, not a siren." But Elias barely heard him. The lady's sorrow felt like his own. Her painted loneliness resonated with a deep, unacknowledged void within him. One evening, working later than usual, the scent of lilies was overpowering. He felt a strange compulsion, a guiding hand. He found himself in the restoration lab, his fingers tracing the cool glass of an antique ink bottle, the bristles of a fine sable brush. The whispers in his mind were clearer now, no longer just sorrowful, but coaxing, promising a shared eternity, a release from the mundane. You understand me? She seemed to sigh from the canvas, from the depths of his own mind. You can ease my sorrow. You can complete me. The following morning, the museum director, making his early rounds, found the Baroque wing unusually cold. The scent of lilies was almost suffocating. Elias Thorne was slumped in his chair before the lady in gray, a serene, almost beatific expression on his pale face. Beside him, on a small taboret, lay an open bottle of antique sepia ink and a single, fine-tipped brush, its bristles stained dark. The director's gaze was drawn to the painting. He blinked, then stared, a knot of ice forming in his stomach. He knew this painting intimately, had studied every brushstroke. The lady in gray still gazed out with her silver, sorrowful eyes. But her lips, which had always held that faint, weary curve of sadness, were now subtly, almost imperceptibly upturned. It was not a smile of joy, but of quiet, knowing triumph. A chilling, possessive satisfaction. Elias did not stir. He was cold to the touch. And as the first rays of morning light slanted through the tall gallery windows, they illuminated the faint, serene smile on his lips, a perfect, tragic mirror to the new expression gracing the ancient canvas. The whispers in the Baroque wing had ceased. Only the overwhelming funereal scent of lilies remained, a silent testament to the curator's final, terrible integration with his lady in gray. Maya practically vibrated with excitement when she landed the coveted internship at the prestigious Blackwood Museum of Natural History. Her lifelong fascination with the tangible remnants of the past was about to be indulged. However, her initial elation was somewhat dampened by her first assignment, a comprehensive inventory of Exhibit B. This wasn't a public gallery, but the museum's sprawling, dimly lit basement storage place. Most senior staff referred to with a cryptic smirk and a swift change of subject. Exhibit B was less a storage area and more a catacomb of forgotten histories. Towering metal shelves groaned under the weight of dust-caked wooden crates. Canvas-draped forms hinted at monstrous or delicate shapes within, and countless uncatalogued artifacts from ill-fated expeditions and dubious acquisitions lay in silent disarray. The air was a palpable presence, bitingly cold, heavy with the intermingled scents of aged dust, decaying paper, sharp chemical preservatives, and an underlying, unidentifiable sweetness that turned vaguely nauseating if dwelled upon. The silence was profound, an oppressive blanket disturbed only by the distant hum of the building's ancient HVAC system and the occasional rustle that Maya initially attributed to unseen vermin. During her first few days, Maya maintained a professional diligence, navigating the narrow aisles with a growing sense of being utterly alone. Then, she began to hear them, the whispers. They started as the faintest of sounds, easily dismissed as the settling of the old building or the sigh of air through unseen vents, a dry, papery rustling, a sibilant hiss from the deeper, unexplored shadows. She'd pause, strain her ears, then shake her head and continue her meticulous work. The monkey skull incident was harder to rationalize. She had carefully logged the small, leering primate relic, noting its unnervingly intact teeth, and placed it securely on a designated shelf in Section Gamma. The following morning, it was perched squarely in the center of her small, temporary workstation, its hollow eye sockets seemingly fixed on her. A cold knot formed in Maya's stomach. She was the only one with a key to this section. The unsettling occurrences multiplied. Tools she'd left on her cart would be found on distant shelves. Cold spots would migrate, settling around particular crates that radiated an almost palpable sense of misery. The whispers grew more persistent, more varied. Sometimes they were a chorus of dry, rustling sighs. Other times, a low, almost guttural murmur that seemed to vibrate up from the concrete floor. She began to feel watched, not by a single presence, but by the collective weight of 1,000 forgotten things, their silent stories pressing in on her. Her sleep became troubled, filled with fleeting images of dusty glass eyes and shadowy forms. The breaking point came with the taxidermied timber wolf. It was a magnificent, if moth-eaten, specimen, poised on a high plinth in a permanent, snarling aggression. its yellowed glass eyes fixed on some unseen prey. Maya was reaching for a stack of fragile photographic plates on a shelf just beneath it when a low growl, so faint she almost doubted her ears, seemed to emanate from the creature. Before she could react, the massive wolf lurched forward, not merely toppling, but seeming to launch itself from the plinth. It crashed to the floor with a heavy thud, landing mere inches from her feet. Its dusty snout pointed directly at her, its painted lips curled back from surprisingly sharp-looking fangs. Its glass eyes, usually dull, seemed to hold a momentary, feral gleam. Shaking, Maya fled Exhibit B and went straight to her supervisor, Dr. Alistair Albright. His office, a stark contrast to the basement's chaos, was a model of sterile precision. Albright, a man whose calm demeanor always seemed to mask a subtle amusement, listened to her stammered account with a patient, almost pitying smile. "My dear Maya," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone, "the power of suggestion in such an environment is quite potent. Old buildings, isolation, a young imagination. It's a common phenomenon." He patted her hand. "Perhaps a short break and a cup of tea?" Frustrated and unnerved by his dismissiveness, Maya thanked him stiffly and turned to leave. As she did, her eyes fell upon a small, exquisitely carved wooden box resting on his otherwise bare credenza. It was dark, almost black, with intricate silver inlay forming unidentifiable sigils. Her breath caught in her throat. She'd seen that box. It was tucked away in the furthest, darkest corner of Exhibit B, in a section marked with a faded, handwritten warning, "Highly sensitive, do not disturb. Property of the H. Dunmore Expedition, 1888. Whispers among the older staff linked that particular expedition to madness, disappearances, and unspeakable rituals. A horrifying realization dawned on Maya. The oppressive atmosphere, the whispers, the malevolent intent she felt radiating from the forgotten artifacts. They weren't random. And Dr. Albright, with his serene smile and condescending reassurances, knew far more than he let on. He wasn't just a supervisor, he was a gatekeeper, perhaps even a connoisseur of the chilling secrets festering in the museum's underbelly. The cold she felt now had nothing to do with the basement's temperature. It was the ice of dawning, unutterable dread. Leo Maxwell was a man who prided himself on pragmatism. After a decade in the army, dealing with the chaotic realities of conflict, he'd sought the graveyard shift at the Grand Military Museum for its promise of quiet and order. The hushed, echoing halls, filled with the silent sentinels of history, were a balm to his nerves. So, when old Henderson, one of the museum's longest-serving guards, started muttering about the miniature soldier dioramas coming alive at night, Leo had dismissed it as the ramblings of a man too long steeped in solitude and dust. "Especially the Waterloo exhibit, son," Henderson had insisted, his voice a conspiratorial wheeze. "Hundreds of them. They don't just sit pretty. Officers move their troops, the cannons shift. I've seen it." Leo had offered a polite nod and a mental eye roll. He'd seen enough real battles. Tiny lead figures held no terrors for him. The museum at night was indeed vast and somber, shadows stretching and contorting familiar shapes into momentarily monstrous forms, but it was all easily explained by the play of emergency lights and an overactive imagination. Still, Henderson's persistent, detailed tales began to grate. The old guard spoke of specific figures, a certain grim-faced Prussian officer, a particularly dynamic British cavalryman, as if they were known troublemakers. To put an end to the nonsense and perhaps gently prove Henderson's mind was wandering, Leo decided a little modern debunking was in order. He brought in his personal GoPro, a compact piece of tech he'd used on hikes. One quiet Tuesday night, after the last staff member had departed and the heavy doors were bolted, Leo meticulously positioned the camera on a high, shadowed cornice overlooking the sprawling, magnificent Battle of Waterloo diorama. It was a masterpiece of miniature artistry. Thousands of figures, no taller than a thumb, frozen in the brutal, chaotic ballet of war. their tiny, hand-painted faces contorted in expressions of fury, agony, and grim determination. He set the camera to record on motion detection, fully expecting days of uneventful footage. The first 3 nights confirmed his skepticism. Nothing but the still, silent tableau under the dim, ambient light. He almost abandoned the project. On the 4th night's review, however, scrolling quickly through the hours of footage, he paused. Something felt off. He replayed a segment from around 3:17 a.m., the deadest hour of the night. No single figure had toppled or slid, but as he watched, an uncanny sensation crawled up his spine. He toggled back and forth between that night's footage and the previous one, aligning them as best he could. There it was, an almost imperceptible collective shift. An entire line of British infantrymen, their red coats a stark line against the painted green field, seemed to be a millimeter or two further forward. A squadron of French cuirassiers, frozen mid-charge, now appeared angled a degree more to the left, their tiny silver swords catching the faint light differently. It was like watching continental drift in miniature, undeniable if you looked closely, yet so slow as to be invisible to casual observation. Floor vibrations from that late-night construction downtown. He told himself firmly, though he knew the museum's foundations were rock solid. The HVAC system? Perhaps? The following night, his scientific curiosity now tinged with a nascent, unwelcome unease, Leo adjusted the GoPro, narrowing its focus onto a particularly dense section of the conflict, the desperate, brutal melee around the vital farmhouse of Hougoumont. When he reviewed this footage, the blood turned to ice in his veins. There, stark and undeniable in the camera's sharp night vision, a single, tiny Napoleonic infantryman in its meticulously detailed blue coat was no longer in its original, dynamically posed position, bayonet fixed. Instead, it was now several millimeters to its right. One miniature lead arm, previously thrusting forward, was now bent, appearing to be dragging another, smaller figure. A fallen drummer boy, his tiny drum askew, away from the hooves of a rearing, sculpted warhorse. Leo zoomed in, his breath catching in his throat. He watched, his pragmatic mind reeling, as the tiny soldier then slowly, with an almost impossible, jerky deliberation for an inanimate object cast from metal, raised its minuscule rifle. It wasn't aiming towards its painted enemies. It was angled slightly upwards, as if sighting something beyond the diorama's painted sky. Or perhaps, towards the shadowed cornice where his camera had been the night before. His hands trembling, Leo fumbled with the audio track, boosting the gain to maximum. Beneath the almost inaudible ambient hum of the museum's systems, he caught it, a chorus of faint, impossibly tiny, metallic clicks and scrapes. It wasn't the rustle of insects or the settling of dust. It was sharper, more rhythmic, like the sound of 1,000 Lilliputian booth heels on the painted plaster landscape, the almost silent clinking of infinitesimal equipment, a ghostly, miniature drum beat only the most sensitive microphone could discern, an army on the move, when no human eyes were meant to see. Sleep became a luxury Leo could no longer afford. He found himself staring at the Waterloo diorama during his patrols, searching for any minute change, his stomach churning with a mixture of dread and a horrified fascination. He had to know. For his final recording, driven by a compulsion he no longer understood, he placed the camera even closer. Nestled amongst some faux foliage at the edge of the Hougoumont scene, its lens aimed directly into the heart of the miniature melee. He only let it record for 10 minutes in that deepest hour of the night before retrieving it, his palms slick with sweat. He never showed the full footage to anyone. The strain of what he'd seen, what he knew, was too much. He resigned the next day, citing personal reasons. His face a pale, haunted mask that Henderson regarded with a sad, knowing look. Months later, after too much whiskey had loosened his tongue and dulled the sharp edges of his terror, he showed a single, blurry, still frame from that final 10-minute recording to his oldest, most trusted army buddy. He pointed a shaking finger at the image. If one stared long enough, squinting past the digital noise in the low light, The horrifying truth was there. Not just one or two figures had shifted. Dozens of them, French grenadiers, British riflemen, Prussian Jaegers, were no longer locked in their historic, painted postures of combat against each other. They were all turned a silent, miniature legion. Their tiny, meticulously painted faces, their minuscule muskets and bayonets and sabers, were all uniformly, unnervingly, and with a chilling, collective intent, pointed directly, accusingly, towards the precise spot among the artificial leaves where Leo's GoPro had been hidden. Their war, it seemed, had found a new, unwelcome observer,